The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 30 on Thursdays, a webinar series from Suscutech. We're going to go ahead and get started here with today's presentation. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. If this is your first time, this is a 30 on Thursday series that we do every other Thursday at 1:30. It's a brief 30-minute webinar series that we offer on all things SharePoint. Our next webinar is scheduled for February 2nd. It's 5 common uses for Nintex workflows. You can register for that at suscutech.com/webinars, as well as see our full schedule of upcoming 30 on Thursdays and other webinars at that same location. Before we get started, if you do have any questions during Kyle's presentation, please use the question window in GoToWebinar, and I will be moderating the questions and interjecting as appropriate, or if there's time at the end, we'll handle them at that point. Today's topic is design patterns in SharePoint, and our presenter is Kyle Schaeffer. He's our senior UX developer at Suscutech. I am Steve Witt. I'm the Vice President of Product Development and Training here at Suscutech, and again, I'll be your moderator, so feel free to use the chat or questions window if you need anything. And with that, we'll get started. Kyle, I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter.
All right. Thank you, Steve. So hello, everyone. While I'm getting presenter here, I'll just do a quick introduction. My name is Kyle Schaeffer, and as Steve mentioned, I'm a senior UX consultant at Suscutech. And I guess sort of just to start out and give you some background on sort of what we do at Suscutech. I do a lot of design things. It's pretty much what I do all day, every day at Suscutech. We're designing SharePoint sites. We're designing, other web projects. We just do a lot of design stuff. And when it comes to SharePoint, specifically, there are some challenges when it comes to that. And in all this experience that we've had doing design things in SharePoint, we've sort of uncovered what I call design patterns. And if you're not familiar with those, it's just one of the things that I wanted to sort of walk you through today. We can talk about, first of all, what is design patterns? How can you use them, and how are they helpful to you as somebody who is trying to apply any type of design, not only to SharePoint, but really to any type of web project in general. So I'll start out with a very quick definition of design pattern. If it's something you've never used before, you've never heard it, I really, really like this definition. This is from the Yahoo Design Pattern Library. And very simply, they say that patterns are optimal solutions to common problems. And that just sounds like such a great thing to me. Like, who doesn't want that? Everybody wants an optimal solution to a common problem. It's very, very obvious that that's beneficial to us. So that's the definition, but what does that really mean? If you start to look at design patterns throughout the internet, throughout all websites, you'll see a lot of common things. Now I'm going to show you some examples of these design patterns, these common solutions, these optimal solutions to all these common problems that we have inside of the browser window. So one example you might see of a design pattern is an accordion. This is something that you might see on various websites, and the reason it's a pattern is because accordions are something that when users see them, they know how they work. If somebody sees this sort of representation on a page, they know they can click on these section headers to sort of open up panels of content. And that's really interesting because if you think about it, the accordion it's not actually any type of control that exists in the web browser. The web browser doesn't have an accordion element, but people know how to use them. They're comfortable with them. And that's the reason why we use design patterns, is because there's probably like 50 different ways you could create some kind of expanding panel with headers above it. But for some reason, people have sort of gravitated to this approach of accordions because it's common, it's something that people use all the time, and when users see that, they're very comfortable with it. So this is a really good example of a design pattern. A couple other examples of design patterns you might see throughout the internet. Breadcrumbs, that's something, this is just a screenshot off of Apple's website. They have sort of a nice breadcrumb treatment. And again, that's not something that you're going to see in terms of, something you can just add natively to your browser, but it's something that people do because users like that. They understand it, it's useful to them, and they're very comfortable with it. A couple other things, just give you other examples. Autocomplete, again, completely, something that people have made up. There's a billion different ways you could approach the problem of, how are you going to standardize input into a text field. But this is sort of the one that everybody has adopted, this idea of autocomplete, where you start typing something out, a little menu pops up with suggestions. It's really useful to users. They like it, and it works. Rating controls are another great example. There's lots of different ways you could capture a rating from users, but they seem to gravitate toward this star rating system. Everybody knows that when you visit a site and you see those little stars with the gray and yellow stars, you can click on them to sort of rate the content that you're looking at. Other examples, just to name a few, pop-up calendars, pagination controls where you sort of jump between pages on whatever you're looking at. Tabs are an extremely common design pattern, and even sort of this idea of the modal dialogue, this dialogue that pops up. It's not actually in a separate window, but it sort of is laid over top of the screen. Again, these are all things that you're going to see throughout the internet, but they're not native to the browser. So these are things that you can use to sort of solve these common problems that appear in websites all the time. And sort of when you're presented, as a designer, when you want to present information, a lot of times what we do as designers is we make decisions, and that's really all we do, is we make, big decisions like what color scheme are you going to use, what components are you going to put into the design, how are these things going to work, and you also make really little decisions like, what font are you going to use, what, amount of padding are you going to put above this element, between elements. There's all these little decisions that you make as well. But really, design patterns are meant to help you solve sort of those bigger decisions that you make. So, while you could come up with your own crazy, way of doing things, it's always a good idea to stop and think, okay, we have all this information we want to display. Will it fit into an existing design pattern that users understand and that users will be happy with? It's just basically the idea of not, try to avoid reinventing the wheel. Is basically what it comes down to. So that's why design patterns are extremely useful. Users recognize them, they understand them, and they're comfortable with them. And that adds a lot of value to you as a designer. It allows you to add value to your designs. So this is a great way to very, instantaneously take a lot of information and put it into something that works and it's been done 1,000 times before. Another thing that people maybe don't consider when they're trying to design things specifically for SharePoint is that SharePoint itself has its own design patterns. These are things that you're going to see throughout the SharePoint interface all over the place. So again, something you want to stop and think about in terms of designing your SharePoint sites. Does this component that I'm working on fit into an existing design pattern? And one example here are these forms. A lot of places in SharePoint you're going to see these forms where they have the labels on the left and the input controls on the right. They also sort of do display forms like this, so if you want to just view information, maybe not edit it or create new items, you're also going to see a very similar display here. And I've spent a lot of time personally working with developers who are like, we need a new form design. How are you going to design this form so it goes into SharePoint? Now this may not be the perfect design depending on what you're trying to do, but the fact is this is easy. If you tell a developer, okay, SharePoint already uses CSS that styles these type of forms, if it easily fits into that pattern, then go ahead and use that, because then you don't have to go in and style it after the fact, because SharePoint already has those styles in place. And you don't have to do a lot of guesswork because the developer can see that HTML, they can see the CSS that's already in place inside of that design. So again, there's a lot of value in reusing these patterns. This may not be the best thing for every approach. I think this sort of pattern is more suited for an intranet or sort of a internal facing sort of form view, mainly because when you get into web forms, like maybe a sign-up form or something like that, there's not a lot of design that goes with this. It's really just basic layout of information. And also, like if you're working on a mobile site or something like that, I don't like the labels on the left approach that SharePoint uses, only because when you're on a mobile device and you click on an input field, it zooms in and you can't see whatever is to the left of it. Really, when you're working with mobile, labels on top is sort of a better approach. So little things like that you're going to have to consider and think, does this pattern really work for what I'm trying to do? But the fact is, it is available to you, so you should consider it. And if you're not considering it, maybe that's something you should start doing. SharePoint has a lot of other design patterns that you can use as well. Again, there's the display form, very, very similar to what you saw above. It's just displaying information instead of capturing it. You have the ribbon, which has all of its crazy stuff that it does. The ribbon has so much functionality to it, but again, that's a pattern. That's something you can reuse. The ribbon in SharePoint is actually very extensible. So as a designer, you can add buttons to it. A developer could add, all kinds of cool functionality to that, and you're reusing those patterns that SharePoint has given you to add functionality and enhance the user interface in SharePoint. It has some more specific input controls as well, like the previous mentioned rating. That's something you can reuse in SharePoint. It has web parts, again, a reusable component, and also list views and library views with a lot of different functionality to those. Again, when you're approached with to design something in SharePoint, you have a lot of different options, and the decisions that you make can have a really drastic effect on how things come out when you actually build them in the SharePoint. So always consider maybe just reusing some of these patterns that are seen throughout the interface. And it's a really good approach. It really works. And it's not, when you're working in SharePoint, you can also sort of bring in those other design patterns that we were looking at that are more common throughout the web. You're not restricted to just using SharePoint design patterns. So something to consider. Don't reinvent the wheel. Definitely consider these design patterns when you're making those decisions in SharePoint. So most of the design patterns I've shown you thus far are more simple design patterns. They're more like an input control or a singular thing. But there's also design patterns for a lot more complex things that are going to go into your design. One example of this is a sign-up form. A lot of times when you do forms specifically on the internet, there's a lot of different ways to capture information. But the truth is, when you do a sign-up form, when you're signing up for some service on the internet, they're pretty much all the same. And that's because a lot of them follow a pattern. And while one form might ask for a little bit different information, the idea of filling out your email address and then typing your password twice, and then maybe giving a display name or something like that, people are used to that. They're comfortable with that, and they recognize that pattern. So again, for these more complex operations, these more complex things that you're putting into your design, there's also patterns for that too. It's not just little mini things that you can throw in your design. Other examples I have up on the screen here, navigation menus, image carousels, even things like an activity stream like you would see on Facebook. There are design patterns for that. There are things that your users are going to expect. And so while you could go off and build something crazy that's sort of really cool and it's your own, when it actually comes to user testing, sometimes that doesn't test so well because it's too different. People are looking at something that they don't expect and they're not sure how it works. So while it's not always, and I will say too that it's definitely not a guarantee of success if you strictly follow all design patterns. That certainly doesn't guarantee that your design is going to be awesome just because you follow design patterns. But sort of reinventing the wheel at every step of the way, that's a pretty good way to guarantee that your design is not going to be very easy to use. So you don't always have to design based on a pattern, but it's probably a good idea to at least consider that and do that most of the time. There may be one particular feature or two particular features that you're putting into a website that you maybe want to spend a little bit more time on and do something different because it's really important to that website for that to work really, really well. But for the most part, everything else is sort of going to fit into one of these patterns that have already been done before. Just something to consider when you're sort of going through this and building out things. And the easiest way to do this is just to look on the internet. Go and see a website that you like and then start to look at it with sort of that eye of a developer or a designer and say, okay, why do I like this? Why is this useful? What information are they showing? How are they laying it out? And sort of consider that and apply it to your own design that you're building as well. So with that information in mind, now that you know what design patterns are, you're seeing them in SharePoint, I'm going to do a quick demonstration here, and we're actually going to first of all just look at a couple design patterns used on the internet. We're going to also start to look at some in SharePoint as well. So first of all, like I mentioned, a design pattern might be something as simple as a sign-in form. You could see, I think it's very difficult for any user to view this page and be like, I don't know what's going on, because it's very simple. It's, sign in, email address, password. The remember me thing is a very common thing that you're going to see, and then sort of the sign in button, the same thing for the sign up form, the new user form over here. It's following a pattern. It's something that you're going to see on a lot of different websites. So, again, a lot of different ways to do this, but this is kind of a good approach because when users see it, they're very comfortable with this approach. This is actually a SharePoint site that I have running here. I just have it running on a little VM, so it's sort of just a little demo site that I created. So you can see it has like some normal SharePoint stuff like a blog, and it has some publishing pages in it, all the normal SharePoint stuff that you'll expect. But again, if you look inside of SharePoint, one of the easiest things to do when you're considering how to design something is just go look at the content it has. I'm going to go look at a pages library here, and you can see, okay, this is a design pattern. This is how SharePoint does this. If I sort of pop this out and maybe view properties of this or something like that, you can see how it does display forms, all kinds of information like that. These are all, SharePoint it's very complex and it does a lot of stuff, but truly the only thing that SharePoint is basically outputting HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you want to copy anything that SharePoint does, all you really have to do is view the source on a page and sort of copy out the bits that you want to use and you want to reuse. And developers can do that. It's a little bit more of a technical task, but it's definitely possible to sort of copy these SharePoint elements and reuse them in your own designs. You can also see sort of the ribbon that I was talking about. They have all sorts of different patterns here. They have regular buttons. They have these horizontal buttons with drop-down menus, sort of these split views. They have sort of text menus. They have all kinds of different things that they do. They have these split buttons with a button on top and a drop-down menu underneath. And again, these are all patterns that SharePoint has given you to sort of copy and reuse if you want to do that. So just pay attention, when you're sort of browsing around in the interface, you're looking at all these elements, just kind of pay attention to all the things that SharePoint does, because you can use that. And you can use that to make a better design when you're building these things out. So the last thing I'm going to do here today is I'm actually going to take one of those sort of cool design patterns that are used on the internet a lot, and this is specifically going to be an element from jQuery. And if you've never used jQuery, it's a really cool script library, and there's a particular component called jQuery UI for jQuery interface. And it has a lot of these little things that you can add to your site. And honestly, they're all sort of geared towards this idea of design patterns. So one particular example is tabs. You can see how tabs work here in jQuery. Again, that's a design pattern that we sort of identified. It's used in a lot of places on the internet. And the cool thing is about this, because SharePoint is just HTML, CSS, JavaScript, we can pull this into SharePoint and use it to augment that interface and to use that as a design element in SharePoint. So what I have here in my SharePoint site is I basically just have a site here with some dummy content. It has a couple web parts, like with some links and things like that. And what I did is I created a page layout for this in SharePoint Designer, and we can sort of take this jQuery UI and implement it into this page. It's a really easy thing to do. I actually have a script. It's called WP Tabify, and if you check out my blog, it's just kyleschaeffer.com. This is where I'm going to pull this from. But basically it just has step-by-step instructions on how to pull these tabs into your SharePoint site so that you can use them. So I'm just going to follow the steps really quick. First of all, you have to register the jQuery and jQuery UI libraries in your master page. So, and if you're not comfortable with code, you can sort of glaze over the stuff I'm looking at here, but this is basically my master page file, and I'm just going to go in and paste that in there. And if I zoom, you can see I just pasted in a couple script tags that point to those jQuery scripts. I'm going to save my changes there. So now that we have jQuery available on the page, I'll go back to my blog and go to step 2. And it says paste this into an attached JavaScript file. Right? So I'm going to copy that code. And I have actually, so you guys don't have to watch me going around and hunting for this stuff, I already have the attached JavaScript file open. And all I'm going to do is paste that function into this file. So again, this is just a jQuery function. It's called WP-Tabify. And what it does is it allows you to basically take a web part zone in SharePoint and turn it into jQuery tabs. It's a pretty cool little feature, and it's fairly easy to use. The next thing we have to do is we have to wrap our web part zone. So basically what that means is we're going to put a div tag in HTML around our web part zone that we want to turn into tabs. And the easiest way to do that is to actually do that in a page layout. So I actually have the page layout open here. And if you look in the code, a web part zone in SharePoint is basically this tag that says web part pages : web part zone. So that's what the web part zone is. You can sort of ignore all this other stuff. It's just sort of stuff that SharePoint puts in there. But when you have that on a page layout, it basically gives you an area where you can add web parts very easily to that page. So on this particular one, I'm going to go here. I'm going to say class equals web part tabs. So again, I'll zoom in here, and you can see I basically just have a web part zone, and it's surrounded by this div tag with a class of web part tabs. So that doesn't actually change anything on the page. If I go back to the page here and I refresh, I still haven't done anything yet. All I've done now is I've put a div around these web parts, around this web part zone, but I haven't actually done anything to it yet. And so that's sort of the last step here, is to run the script. For these styles down here, I've actually already added these to my style sheet, just so you guys don't have to watch me, for the sake of brevity, to sort of explain this better. These are already in the style sheet as sort of an optional step. But the last step is to actually run this script. And the way you do that is, again, in your attached JavaScript file. I'll paste my template here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run a document ready function. And if you don't know JavaScript, it's totally okay. You can copy and paste this stuff. It's fairly easy to use. But basically what that does is in jQuery, when you have document.ready, it's going to wait and run whatever code you put inside of that until the page is already loaded. And this is really useful because you can do things like we're trying to do, where you're trying to turn things into tabs, but only after all those web parts have already loaded on the page. So basically the way my Tabify script works is, you'll see here, you're going to have over on the left where my cursor is, you're going to put a selector, and that's just like a CSS selector. So you might have, dot and then the class name of whatever you're trying to select, and then it's going to say .wp-tabify, and that's going to call the script that we had pasted in earlier. So this particular one has to match the div that we added in that previous step. So that was called .webPartTabs, and if you remember, that's from my page layout. You can see here I just typed in .webPartTabs. And so what that's going to do is it's going to go through my page. It's going to find all the places where we have a class of WebPartTabs. And if it finds that, it's going to run my little script and turn any web parts inside of that zone into a jQuery tab widget. And you'll actually see what it does here if I just refresh the page. It took those 3 web parts that are in the top zone here, and you can see I can actually click on the tab to switch back and forth. So this is pretty cool because it actually even pulls in the title of the web part and uses that as the tab. And the nice thing about using this in SharePoint, because SharePoint is so dynamic, if I wanted to go in and edit these web parts, I could do that. In edit mode, they look like normal web parts. If I want to reorder these, maybe I'm going to put partners on top. All I have to do is drag it up there and drop it. And now when I save the page, again, the order of the tabs have immediately changed. So the cool thing here is that I'm using that design pattern, but I'm sort of augmenting the normal SharePoint patterns with that sort of web design pattern. So this is a great technique. Again, you can check this out at kyleschaeffer.com. It has a tutorial that walks you through that. And it's just one example of using design patterns in SharePoint. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but this is one example how you can sort of augment your SharePoint interface just using these simple design patterns. So to give you guys, we'll go to questions here in just a second, but just to give you guys some more information on this, you can, if you want to learn more about patterns, there's a great website. It's called ui-patterns.com. It's the User Interface Design Pattern Library. They have a lot of examples of these patterns. And what you can do is, like when you're looking at, designing something, and you're thinking, what's the best approach to this? You can sort of just browse through it to see what relates to the information you're trying to portray. So it's a really good website. If you're more of a programmer, design patterns don't necessarily just apply to design. So there's programming patterns. There's patterns in pretty much everything. So another website you can check out is oodesign.com. That's object-oriented design patterns. And of course, the jQuery thing we were looking at, great examples of patterns that you can use in your website. You can check that out at jQueryui.com. So now we'll take a few questions, and Steve, if we had anything come in, I'm happy to take those now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kyle. I'm going to go ahead and take presenter rights back. And I don't see any questions in the question window or the chat window. I'll give it a few more seconds, and while I'm waiting for any questions or comments to come in, I will mention that Kyle, if you're interested in learning more about SharePoint design, styling, and branding, Kyle's got a class coming up next week in DC. We still have 2 seats left for that one. He'll be doing the same class again in August in Dulles in Northern Virginia. And for anybody overseas, we're looking at doing a class at the end of March in Amsterdam in conjunction with SharePoint Saturday Netherlands. If you have any questions and want to attend any of these classes, please contact Angela Grant. Her information is listed there on the screen. And if there are no questions, now I guess I'll go ahead and conclude. And thank you again, Kyle, for your time this afternoon. A lot of good information, and everybody else have a great afternoon. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much.